At Hope Beer we have a core range of 5 beers. 4 of them also appear in bottle and 1 is only in can. But at every tasting we always start with our wheat beer, and it is Richie's favourite. Richie?
Yeah, I think it's probably one of our more complex beers. It started life as a kind of a Belgian style sort of, we called it a saison, but we changed it a little bit since then. It's still got the same characteristics of that style, which is to be dry and drinkable, a little bit spicy. We still use a bit of a Belgian yeast in it that gives it quite an interesting flavour. And we do quite an interesting thing with it. We add a tincture with certain spices in it at the bottling stage, at the packaging stage, I should say. And that they're reasonably subtle, but we get a little bit of an extra kind of, I guess, a point of interest from that. And I think that's one of the reasons this one goes, I'd say this one is our best food pairing, for me anyway. It's quite versatile.
The tincture gives it citrusy flavours.
Yeah,
we use bergamot, lemongrass, and juniper.
Yeah.
And they're kind of, some of them are like gin and tonic spices, but
Yeah.
the beer is also quite dry. So dry and citrusy. We sell a lot of this beer in Howth, in the harbour, where there's a lot of fish restaurants, and the beer goes really well with fish. I've even had it with oysters, and it's better than Guinness with oysters. So let's have a taste.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Yeah, no, I think this one's one of my favourites. I think a lot of people, when it comes to, we like to associate our beer with food as much as we can, and a lot of people struggle when it comes to beer because, you know, the wine is the usual food pairing, and everybody knows, you know, they have rules about wine and things like that, and they know what goes with what. But it's a bit harder when it comes to beer. But I find that Grunt is something that can easily drop into all of the classic dry white wine pairings. So it's one of the reasons we like it with fish. But it stands up better to spice than a wine would. So in a way, I think it's more versatile. It's got more going for it in a way than a lot of wines. So that's one of the reasons I'm very keen on it.
So interestingly, in retail, it's probably one of our least selling beers, but when it comes to restaurants, it's up there in the top 2.
And export.
And export as well.
It's very popular in France. And in a way, I guess it is quite a European style of beer. So it's the sort of thing maybe they're more used to there. But recently, last year, we've been sending a lot of kegs of it to France, which is, I was always a little disappointed in Grunt sales because, like I say, I'm really fond of it, and it's one of the original beers. It's one of the beers. Before I came to work here, I worked at a smaller brewery, and when Hope started, they came to that small brewery to do the pilot beers. I guess before this brewery was built, a year before this brewery was built, Hope was brewed at a smaller contract facility, and it just happened to be the one I worked in. So Grunt was one that I brewed for almost a year before I was an employee here. So it's kind of a little bit, it's got a bit of a personal sort of, I feel attached to it. And I was always a bit disappointed if it didn't, you know, if you wouldn't see it on draft, and the can and the bottle sales were a little lower than its neighbours, but it's nice to see it doing well, and I feel it's done a lot better in the pandemic, because I think one of the things that really made a difference when people weren't going to bars and weren't ordering, you know, the big brands, they'd go into an off license and they'd look at a wall full of cans, and suddenly they might start trying things they hadn't had before. And we always found that once you get someone to try Grunt, they more than often they actually kind of like it. You know, it's just that it's that initial hurdle to get people to try it, because it's pretty drinkable. It's not like
There's a bit of a nose on it, not as much as some of the hoppy beers.
Yeah, exactly. It's not a very highly hopped beer. We're going to try 1 or 2 of those afterwards, but we do use dry hops, which is the process when we add hops directly into the fermenter. I was explaining a little bit earlier about the different ways you can use hops. One of them is obviously in the boil, and it gives you that bitterness at the back of your throat. But one of them, which is really important for a lot of modern beer, is dry hopping, and that's when it goes directly into the fermenter once the beer is already fermented. And instead of imparting bitterness, you get a lot of the essential oils, really aromatic oils get infused into the beer, and they come out in an aroma without giving bitterness. So we do that with Grunt and all the other beers, but yeah, it's not as bitter. It's very drinkable though. I mean, it's dangerous.
No, it's a gorgeous beer. And you'd probably wonder, why on earth did you call a beer Grunt? It's not a very kind of easy on the tongue name, but we call it Grunt. All of our core beers have a little story, and the story of Grunt is about very superstitious Howth fishermen, and Howth fishermen don't like you using the word pig on their boat. A pig, because of its cloven feet, brings misfortune to a boat. So even the mention of the word pig could bring storms and gales to the ship. So nobody uses that word on a ship. However, we kind of took that story and said, well, if a Howth fisherman may have had too much to drink the night before, he would tie a pig to the mast. And that's what you can see on the little label. We have a pig on the top of the mast. And if the captain would come to the ship in the morning and see a pig tied to the mast, he'd need to be very brave to go out to sail that morning so the fisherman could stay in bed. So that's a little bit about the story, and that's our Grunt, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a great beer. So let's try another one.
Yeah, we like to try and use local stories in the labels. So which is the next one? What's the story?
Well,
What do we say?
I thought we'd try our Hop On.
Oh yeah, that's a good story.
And Hop On has a great story as well. We'll get 2 fresh glasses. Great thing about a beer tasting is you don't really need fresh glasses, but you do need to finish the glasses. So we haven't quite finished them. Hop On tells the story of 2 Dublin lads who in the 1985-86 went on a little of a jaunt and took the Dart down to Dunleary, and that's as far as the Dart went in those days. They got off, and they'd done this before. They said, come on, look, there's a boat, let's get on the ferry. And they were 2 young guys, and they jumped on the ferry, got all the way to Holyhead, didn't want to stop there, took the train to London. When they got to London, they said, oh God, we better go home. And they decided not to take the boat back, but they wanted to fly back. So they took a train to Heathrow, got on a plane there, only the plane didn't go to Dublin. The plane went to New York, and they arrived in New York. And this is a true story. There's just a documentary we made about the story, which you'll find if you go onto our website or click on our little QR code here. And it's just a fantastic story about 2 guys going off on a little bit of a...
But these kids were, I think, 8 and 10. Like they weren't young men.
Yeah.
They were children.
No.
And I think they eventually got some New York policeman twigged eventually when they asked him which way town was, or something like that. So I think they got treated well, at least by the police department, and they got shipped off home to.
But at this stage, Hop On has become our most popular beer.
Yeah.
It's a session IPA, 4.3% alcohol, so it's easily drinkable. The taste and the flavour appeals to a lot of people who like craft beer. But unlike a lot of other craft beers, it's not one that you can't have more than a pint of because it's too strong an alcohol.
Yeah, so the idea of it is an IPA, and India Pale Ale, it's the backbone of the craft beer revolution, I suppose, if you like. It's a traditional English style, but as we brew it, and as almost everybody brews it now, except the English, it's very much an American style. It's something that the Americans took on and changed. They used a very distinctive type of hop that they grow in America, really citrusy. This beer has a huge grapefruit nose, so it's a huge, big hoppy style. But we called it a session IPA because traditionally, or at least a lot of the American style ones might be 6, 7, they're strong in percentage of alcohol, and you can't drink very many of them. We've kept this down at 4.2, 4.3, and it means it's a lot easier to drink without having the consequences.
IPAs make up 50% of the craft beer category. So it just goes to show it's not surprising that this beer is our most popular beer. But the nose is fantastic.
Yeah, so this is a perfect example of the dry hopping technique that I was telling you about earlier. We use for about 4,000 litres, which is what we normally have after brewing twice into one of those tanks. We can put up to 50 kilos of hops directly in the top. It also means it makes it quite an expensive beer, but it's really worth it when you smell it. Hops are expensive, but they're great.
Well, these hops,
yeah, a lot of American hops are expensive. You know, they might be 30 euros per kilo, so it ends up being a lot of money that you're throwing into.
They pretty much all come from Oregon and Washington
exactly,
State.
Yeah. So we have a supplier here who gets them directly imported from a farm in the Pacific Northwest, and that's where almost all the American hops are grown, and it's one of the great kind of hop regions of the world. It's got a very similar climate to Northern Europe. It's very rainy. They get a lot of sun in the summer. So
what are the hops we use in this?
The predominant hop is one called Citra, and it's become a real modern classic in craft brewing. As the name suggests, it's really citrusy. It's particularly grapefruit. We also use a hop called El Dorado, and we use a hop called Azacca. And Azacca is quite a tropical one, and I think that comes through quite a bit, even though it's the lesser of the three that we dry hop with. But it's quite. The American hops tend to be either very citrusy, grapefruity, lemony, orangey, or else they might fall into what they call, the kind of stone fruit, peaches and mangoes and tropical kind of flavors like that. So Azacca has a bit more tropical thing going on.
So sometimes people say to us, the name of your company, Hope, it's because the word hop is in it, but that's not the reason. And it might be nice to tell a little story about Hope Beer.
Yeah.
So we have a kind of a quasi sister company in the Netherlands, in Zaandijk. If you think of the Netherlands and you think of greenhouses and beautiful windmills, this is where this brewery is, and it's where I grew up. A friend of mine set up a brewery there called Hope, but we call it, because it's double OP, we call it in English, we call it Hoop. And so together we kind of went on this craft beer journey with this sister company of ours. Now, obviously we didn't want to call it Hoop, but we called it Hope. So we share a few synergies, and the brand name and the image is the same. They brew very different beers to us. Our beers are much more American style. Their beers are more Belgian style beers. But we have a very good collaboration. They have exactly the same brewery as us. So when we have issues, we can talk to each other also with the canning and the bottling line, and we can help each other on a technical side. Sometimes when we can't get ingredients here that we can get over there, we share, and there's a lot of helping going on back and forth, which you wouldn't necessarily get with other breweries. When we started the brewery, Des, my wife Jean and I, we were all 50 plus, so I invested my pension. I used to work for a big packaging company. I got a nice pension out of that when I left them, and I put it all in the brewery. So I can tell you, if you put all your money and your savings in a project like this, you need a lot of hope to make sure it works. So that's how we could justify using the name Hope as well, and it's done really well for us. And when we started, I made a promise. I made it more to my kids, and I said, when we've sold our first 1 million litres of beer, and don't forget, we make about 200,000 to 300,000 litres of beer every year, I will get a tattoo. And my kids thought this was fantastic, of course, because if your dad has a tattoo, well then, you don't need to ask him if you want a tattoo. So last summer, I got a present for my birthday from my kids to get a tattoo. And there you go, there's the Hope logo tattooed on my shoulder forever and ever now. And that's the end of it. So we have all these fake badges, but I have the real one. And so that's a little background to Hope Beer.
Where are you gonna get your tattoo for the 2 million?
I don't know, I have to decide what it is yet. Most brewers, when they get a tattoo, it's the image of a hop And anyway, that's a little personal story in the middle of it.
Has the yeast thing.
Let's have another drink after that. What can we say about this? It's just a wonderful beer. We sell a lot of this beer on draft as well. Here in North County Dublin, you can't really walk very far without finding our hop on beer on draft, and it's good. And it's good.